My name is Lauren Carter. I am 30 years old, and the day my family erased me began with a call from my grandmother. Her voice trembled as she asked if I was feeling better, though I had no idea what she meant. Then came the silence, followed by words that split my world apart. My sister's wedding had already happened. More than 100 guests filled the ballroom, but my seat was left empty. When I asked why, the reason was sharper than any blade. My parents said I wasn't invited because I would cause drama. In that moment, I knew I had been cut out of their story. But stay with me, because what happened next turned their betrayal into the beginning of my own justice. I was sitting in my car in the parking lot outside the office, the late afternoon sun beating against the windshield, when my phone lit up with Grandma Rose's name. I pressed the screen quickly, still expecting her to ask about my week or tell me about her roses blooming back in Dayton. Her voice was soft but heavier than usual. "How are you feeling, Lauren? Are you doing any better?" My brow furrowed. "Better from what, Grandma?" "I'm fine, why?" There was a pause, a silence so heavy I could hear her breath shifting through the speaker. My stomach tensed because I knew whatever came next was going to hurt. "Your parents told me you weren't invited to Isabella's wedding because you might cause drama." For a moment the words didn't land. I blinked at the dash of my car, the hum of traffic muffled through the glass. My sister's wedding. The words repeated in my head like an echo I couldn't stop. I shook my head even though she couldn't see me. "Grandma, what wedding?" Another pause. I heard her swallow, and her voice trembled when she finally spoke. "Sweetheart, your sister was married last weekend. A big wedding. The whole family was there." The steering wheel under my palms felt like ice. Married. The family gathered, celebrated, and I hadn't even known it was happening. My throat tightened so much it burned. "I didn't know," I whispered, my voice breaking. "I didn't know anything." Her breath hitched on the other end, and then I could hear the grief in her sigh. "I don't understand why they would do that to you, Lauren, but I thought you deserved to know." We said goodbye soon after. Her voice was full of worry I couldn't soothe, and when the call ended, the silence in my car was deafening. The world outside went on with its normal rhythm, horns blaring, people walking into stores, engines starting. Mine had cracked open. I sat there gripping the steering wheel, unable to turn the key, unable to breathe properly. Isabella had been married. Everyone had been there. Neighbors from down the block, cousins I hadn't seen since college, my parents, of course, and me. I was nowhere. It wasn't only about the wedding. It was confirmation of something I had been pushing down for years, a truth I tried not to name. That to my family I was disposable. I closed my eyes and leaned back into the seat, letting the weight of it all sink into my chest. The words Grandma had repeated kept replaying in my mind. They said I would cause drama. My lips curled into a bitter smile even as my eyes stung. I had spent my whole life trying to stay quiet, to not step on their pride or steal their spotlight. I thought if I worked hard enough, kept my head down, one day they might see me. One day I might matter to them. But now the evidence was too loud. They hadn't just forgotten me. They hadn't overlooked me. They had chosen to erase me from a moment that would live forever in photographs and stories, a moment they wanted me nowhere near. My phone slipped from my hand into the cup holder, the screen dark. My chest rose and fell fast, shallow, like I was fighting against the air itself. Grandma's words circled again. "They told me you would cause drama." I thought of my mother's tight smile at Sunday dinners, my father's clipped tone when I tried to talk about my work, the way Isabella always smirked when the conversation turned in her favor. They had painted me as the problem so cleanly that even Grandma had believed it until she heard my voice. I gripped the wheel tighter, the leather creaking beneath my fingers. The parking lot was thinning out as coworkers pulled away, heading home to their families, their dinners, their lives. I sat frozen because mine felt like it had been pulled out from under me. I finally turned the key and the engine rumbled to life. My eyes blurred, but I blinked them clear, forcing myself to focus on the road. The drive home was a haze of stoplights and brake lights, my thoughts louder than the radio I never turned on. When I parked outside my apartment, I didn't move right away. The building's brick walls loomed quiet, the stairwell window reflecting the fading light. I picked up my phone again, stared at the black screen, then set it back down. No one had called me, not my mother, not my father, not Isabella. Only Grandma, and even she had been told a version of me that wasn't real. I carried my bag upstairs and let it drop on the couch. The silence inside pressed against me, the same silence that had followed me from the car. I sat down, elbows on my knees, my hands covering my face. My breath came ragged, uneven. The wedding had already happened, the pictures already taken, the vows already spoken, the glasses already clinked. My parents had smiled, my sister had shined, and I had been erased. And sitting there in that still apartment, I finally admitted it to myself. It wasn't an oversight, it wasn't bad communication. It was deliberate. They had decided I did not belong. And now there was no going back. When I finally let my head drop back against the couch, my mind did what it always did when reality felt too sharp. It drifted backward to years that still ached in quiet ways. Childhood memories never left me alone, especially the ones that showed me exactly where I stood in my family. I saw my father, Richard Carter, standing on the sidelines of a county fair pageant when I was 9 and Isabella was 12. She had begged to enter the junior beauty contest, and he had driven her 2 towns over just to watch her walk across a stage in a blue satin dress. His voice was booming, cheering so loudly the other parents turned. Evelyn sat beside him, clapping with both hands and calling Isabella's name as if her daughter were the only girl in the room. I had held a stack of library books in my lap, waiting for the show to end, invisible beside them. When Isabella won second place, my father hoisted her up on his shoulders and declared that she was destined for more than this small town could ever offer. No one asked me how I had done on the spelling bee that same morning. I had placed first, but there had been no banners, no clapping, no shoulders to sit on. That pattern followed us home. Evelyn's friends at church would smile wide when she bragged about Isabella singing a solo at Sunday service or organizing a youth fundraiser. I remember standing in the fellowship hall holding a plate of cookies I had baked for the same event. My mother barely glanced at me as she praised Isabella's voice. I bit my lip, the taste of chocolate and sugar clinging to my hands, and wondered why my efforts never seemed to matter. By the time I reached high school, I was used to shrinking. Isabella floated through the halls in cheer uniforms, laughing with friends while I kept my head down in the library, chasing grades like they were oxygen. I told myself that if I worked hard enough, they would notice me. I still remember the envelope that came in the spring of my senior year. A scholarship offer, a full ride to Ohio State, something I had dreamed about quietly for years. I rushed home, heart pounding, the letter clutched in my hand. My father was at the kitchen table reading the sports section, Evelyn chopping vegetables at the counter. I laid the envelope down and said I got it, a full scholarship. Richard looked up briefly, nodded, and muttered, "Good for you," before folding the paper back in front of his face. Evelyn smiled, but it was thin, distracted, as she asked if I planned to live in the dorms or come home on weekends to help Isabella with her driving practice. The sting of that moment never left me. Even when I moved into the dorms, even when I stayed up all night finishing papers, even when professors praised me. The calls home were always about Isabella, her internships, her plans, her boyfriends. I worked harder. I thought maybe a degree would change something. When I finished my MBA at Northwestern, I sat in a sea of caps and gowns, my name called, my diploma in hand. My parents were in the stands, but only clapped politely, their smiles fading when they noticed Isabella's boredom. That night at dinner, Richard said he was proud of her for getting promoted at her PR firm. He never mentioned my degree again. The memory that still cut the deepest happened years later. It was Thanksgiving of 2018. The table was crowded with cousins and aunts, laughter spilling through the house. The smell of turkey and cinnamon filled the air. I had just been offered a position at Hayes Capital, a firm I had fought hard to get into. I decided to share the news, thinking maybe this time would be different. I stood, my fork clinking against my glass, and said I wanted to tell everyone I've been promoted and I'll be moving into a new role at Hayes Capital. The chatter quieted for a moment, heads turning toward me. My cheeks warmed, but I held onto that little flicker of pride. Before I could say more, Richard leaned back in his chair, wiped his mouth with his napkin, and said, "Isabella is the true pride of this family. She's just landed a big account at her firm. Now that is impressive." The cousins applauded, Evelyn clapped her hands, and Isabella gave me that smirk I had known since childhood, the one that told me she was used to winning before the game even started. My words shrank in my throat. I sat back down smiling like it didn't matter while inside something cracked so loudly I was afraid they could hear it. That night after everyone left, I stood at the kitchen sink rinsing plates. Evelyn came up beside me humming. She said I should be grateful to have a steady job, that not everyone could shine like Isabella, but I was still useful. Useful. The word stuck like grit between my teeth. I went back to my small apartment in Cleveland with leftovers in a foil tray and sat alone at the table, my new title echoing in my head. It should have felt like victory, but it felt hollow. Those years taught me a lesson I wish I could have unlearned. That in the Carter house, no matter what I achieved, I would never be enough. The spotlight was reserved for Isabella. The applause was saved for her. And every time I tried to step forward, someone pushed me back into the shadows. Now, sitting in my apartment years later with Grandma's calls still ringing in my ears, it all connected. The wedding, the lies, the excuses. It was the same story written over and over. Only this time it was permanent. The memories left me drained, my chest heavy with the weight of years I could never reclaim. I poured a glass of water, the kitchen lights casting long shadows across the counter, and pressed my palms against the cool surface. I understood then that being excluded from the wedding wasn't just about one day. It was the final proof of what had been true all along. To them, I was never meant to belong. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed, the room dim except for the glow of my phone. I had avoided opening Instagram for days, but the silence around me pressed too hard. A part of me needed proof, something real, even if it shattered me. With my thumb, I unlocked the screen and scrolled. The first image stopped me cold. Isabella stood beneath an arch of white roses, her long lace gown glimmering under the lights. My father held her arm, his face proud, as he walked her down the aisle like it was his own triumph. My mother was in the front row, her hands pressed together against her lips, tears spilling down her cheeks. The caption beneath read, "Perfect day, perfect family." My stomach twisted. Perfect family. I kept scrolling. Photo after photo filled the screen, each one carving into me deeper than the last. The ballroom was lit by crystal chandeliers, round tables dressed in silk cloths, a towering cake gleaming at the center. The crowd was endless, faces from every corner of my past. Neighbors from Dayton who used to wave at me on the way to school. Cousins I had not seen since I was a teenager. My mother's church friends, my father's golf partners. All of them had been invited, dressed up and smiling into the camera. All of them except me. My throat tightened as I swiped again. There was Isabella twirling on the dance floor, her veil catching the light as she laughed in my father's arms. Evelyn leaned into the frame, her face bright with joy, no trace of guilt. In another photo, Richard stood with a microphone, raising a glass of champagne, smiling so wide his cheeks flushed. The caption read, "A father's proudest moment." I dropped the phone into my lap, my pulse racing in my ears. This wasn't an intimate ceremony. It wasn't a small gathering where space was limited. It was a spectacle, one they had gone out of their way to make sure I did not see. I picked the phone back up and scrolled again, punishing myself with every new picture. Aunts posed by the cake, uncles clapping in the background, children running across the dance floor. Laughter frozen in frames. I searched desperately for a glimpse of myself, some hint that maybe they had mentioned me, maybe a chair with my name left empty. But there was nothing. The silence around my name was louder than the music in those videos. I thought of Grandma Rose's voice, steady but uncertain, when she said they told her I would cause drama. The words wrapped around me like a chokehold. My parents had not only excluded me, they had justified it with a story that made me the villain. The bitterness surged so quickly I clenched my jaw until it hurt. Drama. That was what they called me. After all the years of silence, of swallowing back my own pain so they could shine a little brighter, they had branded me the problem. I stood pacing the room, the phone still in my hand. My reflection in the mirror across the room startled me. My eyes were red, my shoulders tight. I barely recognized the woman staring back. I wanted to scream, to throw the phone, to make the walls hear what they never had. Instead, I walked back to the bed, sank down, and stared again at the glowing images. A part of me couldn't look away. The dress, the flowers, the chandeliers, they had crafted a perfect picture without me. My father's speech, my mother's tears, Isabella's smile. None of it included me, and that was the point. My chest rose and fell with uneven breaths. I thought about the years of being told to keep my voice down, to stop arguing, to not ruin the mood. How convenient it must have been to write me out of the story entirely. My fingers trembled as I scrolled to the last post, a wide shot of the entire ballroom, tables packed with guests raising their glasses high. My parents in the center, Isabella beaming beside Thomas, her new husband. Everyone was lit with joy. Everyone but me, who wasn't even a shadow in the room. The air in my apartment felt heavy, pressing against my chest. I squeezed the phone in my hand, my nails digging into the case, until finally I hurled it onto the mattress. It bounced once before landing face down, the light cutting off. My hands covered my face, heat rising behind my eyes. The only sound was the echo of Grandma's voice in my memory, repeating the excuse that had erased me. "They said you would cause drama." I let the words settle, my breath ragged in the dark. Then I lay back against the pillows, staring at the ceiling. The silence was thick but steady, the kind that told me something inside me had shifted for good. I woke up the next morning with the same heaviness pressing against my chest, the kind of weight that no amount of sleep could dissolve. The images from Isabella's wedding still burned behind my eyelids, and Grandma's trembling voice replayed in my head until I thought I would scream. I moved through my apartment like a ghost, making coffee, sitting at the table, staring at the steam rise, but not tasting a single sip. By mid-afternoon, something inside me hardened. I could not carry this silence any longer. I needed to hear it from them. The drive to Shaker Heights felt longer than usual, every stoplight daring me to turn back. But I didn't. My hands were white-knuckled around the steering wheel, my heart thundering with each mile. I parked in front of the house. I had once called home, the brick facade looking just as polished as ever, flower pots blooming neatly along the porch. The same house where birthdays and Christmas mornings had unfolded, where laughter had filled rooms I never fully belonged in. I walked up the path, my footsteps sharp on the concrete. The porch light was already on, though it was barely evening. I rang the bell, and a moment later the door cracked open. Evelyn stood there in a soft blouse and slacks, a dish towel in her hand. Her eyes widened at the sight of me, and she forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Lauren," she said carefully, like she wasn't sure whether to welcome me in or close the door. "What are you doing here?" I stepped past her without asking. The smell of garlic and onions drifted from the kitchen, familiar and irritating all at once. My voice shook at first, but steadied as I spoke. "Why didn't anyone tell me Isabella was getting married?" The towel twisted in her fingers. She opened her mouth, closed it, then tried again. "We thought you wouldn't want to be in such a big crowd," she whispered. "You never liked those kinds of events." I laughed, a sound sharp enough to echo through the hallway. "You decided for me. You erased me from my own sister's wedding because it was easier than letting me be there." Footsteps echoed across the hardwood floor. My father appeared from the living room, his glasses perched low on his nose, his expression already hard. "What's going on? Why are you shouting in my house?" I turned to him, the words bursting out before I could soften them. "Tell me why I wasn't invited." Richard's jaw clenched. He glanced at my mother, then back at me with a look that sliced through what little hope I had left. "You want the truth?" "Yes," I said, my voice cracking but firm. "Because you would have ruined it," he said plainly. "Isabella deserved her day without you making a scene. We had to protect her and protect our reputation." I blinked, stunned, even though part of me had already known. "You think I would have ruined it?" "All I wanted was to be there. I'm her sister." His lips pressed into a thin line. "At the country club, at church, everyone knows how difficult you are. We couldn't risk it." I staggered back a step, my breath coming in shallow bursts. Years of being told to quiet down, to not argue, to not embarrass them, came crashing down in a single wave. A voice floated from the staircase, cool and casual. "Honestly, it was a relief not having you there." I looked up. Isabella descended slowly, her hair pinned neatly, a silk sweater draped over her frame. Her expression was smug, her tone dripping with satisfaction. You would have made it awkward. Everyone knows you don't fit in with that world. My chest tightened. My sister, the girl I once built blanket forts with, the girl I shared a bedroom with for 12 years, was looking at me like a stranger. You cut me out, I said quietly, my throat raw. You made sure I wasn't even an afterthought. She tilted her head, her smile small and cruel. It was better that way. The silence that followed was unbearable. My mother wrung the dish towel, her gaze darting between us. My father's expression didn't soften. Finally, Richard chuckled under his breath, shaking his head as though I were a child throwing a tantrum. Be serious, Lauren. You'll never get married. You don't have it in you. The words hit with the force of a punch. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. For years I had swallowed their slights, convinced myself that if I achieved more, worked harder, they might see me. But here it was laid bare, their judgment final and merciless. Something shifted deep in my chest. The trembling in my hands stilled, my back straightened, and my voice came out calm, steadier than I felt. Then don't expect an invitation to mine. The room froze. My mother's mouth fell open, her eyes glistening with shock. My father's smirk faltered, though he quickly covered it with disdain. Isabella blinked, her smugness cracking for just a flicker before hardening again. I didn't wait for their response. I turned toward the door, my shoes loud against the floorboards. Evelyn called my name softly, almost pleading, but I didn't stop. I pulled open the door and stepped into the cool evening air, my lungs finally filling with something that wasn't poison. As I walked down the porch steps, I heard laughter behind me, faint but sharp like knives thrown at my back. I slid into my car, gripped the steering wheel, and stared at the house that had never been a home. The porch light glowed warmly, a beacon for everyone but me. I started the engine, the rumble steady under my hands, and pulled away from the curb. My reflection in the rearview mirror looked pale and worn, but my eyes held something I hadn't seen in years. Resolve. The streets blurred past each block, carrying me farther from the words that had been meant to break me. For the first time in a long time, I realized they no longer had the power to decide who I was. They had thrown me out of their story, but maybe it was time I wrote my own. When I unlocked the door to my apartment, the familiar quiet wrapped around me like a blanket. I set my bag on the counter and leaned against the kitchen island, breathing in the scent of coffee grounds still lingering from that morning. The tension from my parents' house clung to me, but underneath it pulsed a secret. They had never noticed, a truth that I had kept close to my chest for months. On my left hand, the diamond ring caught the light as I reached for a glass of water. I turned it slowly, letting it glitter against the fading sunset. 6 months ago, Julian Hayes had slipped it onto my finger, his hand steady, his eyes shining with certainty. He had asked me to marry him in the simplest way, no audience, no grand stage, just the two of us sitting in his small but elegant condo in downtown Cleveland, a bottle of wine half finished between us. I could still hear his voice that night. Lauren, I don't care where we live or what anyone thinks. I just know I don't want another day without you. It had been the first time in my life that someone's words didn't come laced with conditions or expectations. I said yes, with tears running down my face, and for once they were tears of relief. Since then, the ring had been there, everyday, quiet proof of a future I was building. My parents had seen me dozens of times at family dinners, at Christmas, even once when I stopped by for coffee with my mother. They never noticed. Or maybe they never cared to look closely enough. I carried my glass into the living room and sat down, the weight of the day pressing into my shoulders. My mind drifted back further to the first time Julian had walked into my life. It was sophomore year at Ohio State. I was balancing 2 part-time jobs, carrying a full course load, trying to prove myself in every direction. He was already different than not the typical finance major who thought the world revolved around his father's name. We met in an economics lecture, the kind with 200 students and a professor who droned through PowerPoint slides. I was scribbling notes furiously when a folded piece of paper landed on my desk. I opened it expecting some joke, but it was a sketch of the supply and demand chart drawn more clearly than the one on the screen. At the bottom he had written, "Looks like you're working harder than the professor." I turned to see a tall guy with sandy hair and sharp green eyes grinning at me. That was Julian. From then on, we found each other in study groups, coffee shops, late-night libraries. He respected the grind, never belittled my ambition, never told me to be quieter or smaller. When my parents forgot to call after I won a scholarship, he showed up with takeout Chinese and sat with me until my tears dried. I thought about all of that now, sitting in the dim light of my apartment, and wondered how my family could be blind to what was right in front of them. They had dismissed me so thoroughly. They never once asked about the ring, never once noticed the glow in my face when I mentioned Julian. The sound of a key turning in the lock pulled me out of my thoughts. Julian stepped inside, his tie loosened, his jacket slung over his shoulder. His eyes immediately found mine, and in 2 strides he was at my side. "Rough day?" he asked softly, brushing a strand of hair from my face. I let out a shaky laugh. "That's one way to put it." He sat down beside me, his arm wrapping around my shoulders. I told him everything, the words spilling out faster than I expected. My parents' cold faces, Isabella's smirk, my father's cruel declaration that I would never get married. Julian listened, silent, his thumb tracing circles on the back of my hand. When I finished, the silence in the room was heavy, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator. Julian finally spoke, his voice calm but firm. "They don't get to define you. They never did." Tears burned in my eyes, but this time I didn't fight them. I rested my forehead against his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him grounding me. He pulled back gently, tilting my chin, so I had to look at him. "You know what I see when I look at you. I see someone stronger than anyone gives her credit for. Someone who has built a life on her own terms." I shook my head, my voice small. "They made it clear. To them, I'm nothing." Julian's jaw tightened. "Then we don't need them." I blinked at him, startled. "What do you mean?" He held my left hand, the diamond catching the light between us. "We get to decide what our life looks like. When the time comes, when we stand up in front of the people we love, we'll choose exactly who deserves to be there." The conviction in his voice pierced the fog in my mind. For months, I had been clinging to scraps of hope, waiting for my family to see me. But here was Julian offering me something else entirely. Choice. Freedom. I squeezed his hand, a flicker of something fierce rising inside me. He smiled, then that steady smile that had carried me through every storm, and kissed the top of my head. For the rest of the evening, we sat close, the television murmuring in the background, dinner forgotten on the counter. The chaos of my family still buzzed around me, but it no longer felt like the center of my world. When I finally lay down to sleep that night, Julian's words replayed over and over. "We will choose." For the first time, the thought of a wedding didn't feel like a dream I would never reach. It felt like a promise waiting to be fulfilled, a day where I would stand tall and decide who had earned the right to witness it. And I knew without doubt that some faces would not be there. The next morning, sunlight spilled across my desk at Hayes Capital, glinting off stacks of reports and half-drained coffee cups. My team huddled around the conference table, tension running high as we tried to contain a client crisis that had erupted overnight. A major account had threatened to pull millions unless we could stabilize their portfolio before the market closed. I leaned forward, scanning the numbers, my voice steady as I walked the group through a new strategy. Relocate here, hedge against the exposure there, call the client directly, and show them we were already executing. For 2 hours I directed, recalculated, reassured. My team responded like clockwork, their confidence rising as mine did. By noon, the market shifted back in our favor and the phones finally quieted. When I left the boardroom, the CEO, Michael Grant, intercepted me in the hallway. He was a tall man with a stern face that rarely broke into a smile, but today he placed a hand on my shoulder. "Lauren, that was textbook leadership. You kept the client and saved us all a headache. Keep this up, and I see a very clear future for you here." His words warmed something inside me that had long been starved, recognition earned and freely given. I thanked him, tried to keep my voice level, then walked back to my office with a pride my family had never allowed me to feel. But pride had a way of unraveling the moment I remembered home. I sat at my desk, recalling dinners around the oak table in my parents' dining room. Every Sunday, I would try to share pieces of my work, the challenges I faced, the clients I managed. I would get no more than 2 sentences in before my father would cut across my words. Lauren, enough about spreadsheets, let Isabella tell us about her weekend. And then all eyes would turn to her, Isabella glowing as she described some gala or photo shoot, my mother beaming as though her daughter were on the cover of Vogue. I had stopped trying after a while. My victories never made it past the first course. Later that week, I received a call from my mother asking me to stop by the house. Her voice carried that rehearsed sweetness she always wore before delivering something bitter. Against my better judgment, I agreed. When I arrived, Evelyn met me at the door with a polite smile that did not reach her eyes. She led me into the living room where my father was already seated, papers neatly arranged on the coffee table. Richard cleared his throat, his expression the same one he wore in the board meetings I had sometimes observed when I was younger, back when I still thought he admired me. Lauren, we need to talk about the house. I sat down slowly, my palms pressing against my knees. What about it? Evelyn folded her hands, her tone careful. Your sister is married now. She and Daniel will need stability, a foundation to start their lives. We think it is best if the family home passes fully to her. I blinked, stunned. That house had been in our family for 3 generations. I was still listed in the will alongside Isabella. My voice caught. You want me to give up my share? Richard slid the papers toward me, his gaze cold. We already had our attorney draft the documents. All you need to do is sign. Anger flared in my chest. So after shutting me out of the wedding, now you want to erase me from the house too? Richard's eyes narrowed. It is not about erasing. It is about doing what is practical. You do not need it. Isabella does. Evelyn added softly. Think of it as a gift to your sister. A gesture of unity after all that has happened. I let out a bitter laugh. A gift. After telling the entire family I would ruin her wedding. After pretending I do not exist. Now you expect me to hand over the only tie I have left to this family. The silence that followed was suffocating. My father's jaw tightened, his voice cutting through. You will sign, Lauren. You have always been difficult, but this is bigger than you. I pushed the papers back across the table, the pen rolling onto the carpet. Number Evelyn's smile faltered. Think carefully. This will make things much easier for everyone. My throat burned as I stood. For everyone but me. You made your choice when you locked me out of the wedding. You do not get to take this too. Richard's voice rose sharp enough to pierce the air. Then do not expect to be welcome here anymore. I turned toward the door, my pulse racing, but my steps steady. I paused just long enough to glance back at them. You already made sure of that. The weight of the house seemed to press down on me as I walked outside, the autumn air biting against my cheeks. My chest ached, but beneath it ran a current of something stronger, steadier. They could strip me of invitations, dismiss my achievements, even try to take my inheritance, but I was done handing them pieces of myself. I unlocked my car, slid inside, and gripped the steering wheel. My hands were trembling, but not from fear. The heaviness lingered, yet beneath it was a quiet certainty. They had taken enough, and I would not give them more. The following morning, I woke to the vibration of my phone buzzing on the nightstand. Dozens of notifications lit the screen, messages from people I barely spoke to anymore. Some were curious, some pitying, others laced with that sharp edge of gossip disguised as concern. Confused, I opened Facebook, and the words hit me like a slap. Evelyn had written a post in the church group page, her profile picture smiling sweetly beside the venom. She wrote that her younger daughter had become selfish, ungrateful, and destructive. She said I had chosen to distance myself, that inviting me to Isabella's wedding would have only brought drama and ruined the day. She ended it with a line about how parents sometimes had to make hard choices for the greater good of the family. The comments poured beneath her words like gasoline on a fire. Women from the church added their prayers, some clucked about how heartbreaking it must be to raise a daughter who turned against her family. A few neighbors chimed in about how they had always sensed something was off with me. My hands shook as I scrolled, bile rising in my throat. They had not only cut me out of a wedding, they had made me into a public villain, the scapegoat for every whisper in the community. My phone buzzed again with a message from Mrs. Henderson, the neighbor who had watched us grow up. Lauren, is this true? Did you really fight with your family so badly? I dropped the phone onto the couch cushion and buried my face in my hands. Rage burned through me, hot and bitter but tangled with something colder, heavier. Humiliation. They had not just excluded me, they had branded me. All morning texts and calls rolled in. Old classmates, distant cousins, even people I had not spoken to in a decade. Each message carried curiosity or judgment, but very few carried kindness. I considered writing a response, posting my side of the story, but the thought made me sick. My mother had played her role so well, painting herself as the long-suffering parent. Anything I wrote would only feed the circus. By afternoon, I sat in silence on my balcony staring at the skyline. The ache in my chest was unbearable, and for the first time in years, I wondered if staying silent was just letting them win again. That evening Julian came home, his face clouded the moment he saw me. He set his briefcase down and crossed the room. "Lauren, I saw it. My parents saw it too." I stiffened. "Your parents?" He nodded, sitting beside me, his hand warm against mine. "My father called me the moment he read it. He is furious. He said he is not going to let this go unanswered." The words made my stomach tighten. William Hayes was not a man who minced words or tolerated slander, especially toward family. But the thought of him stepping into this mess made me nervous. Julian squeezed my hand. "He told me this will stop now. He is going to call them directly." I inhaled sharply. The idea of William Hayes, a man with influence and authority, calling my parents terrified me almost as much as it reassured me. My family thrived on control, but William was not someone they could bend with guilt or charm. That night, as I lay in bed, I replayed the post in my mind. My mother's smiling photo beside those words that cut me into pieces. But, under the raw hurt, another truth pulsed. I was not standing alone anymore. Julian had chosen me, not them. And now his father, a man of stature, was willing to stand with me too. The next day, William Hayes himself called me. His voice was steady, deep, carrying that kind of authority that silenced a room. "Lauren, I want you to hear this from me. That post was malicious and unacceptable. I already told Evelyn that her words were beneath the dignity of any parent. If they continue, I will make sure the church and the community know the truth." I swallowed hard, my throat tight. "Mr. Hayes, I do not want to drag anyone through public battles." His voice softened but did not waver. "Sometimes battles find us whether we want them or not. They chose to humiliate you in front of others. That will not stand." When the call ended, I sat in the stillness of my living room, the words echoing in my chest. For so long, it had been me against them, one voice drowned out by the chorus of my family's narrative. But now, for the first time, another voice had spoken loud and firm on my side. The fear did not vanish. I knew my parents and I knew Isabella. They would not take kindly to being challenged, especially by someone outside the bloodline. But beneath the unease was a new certainty. I was not alone anymore. I closed my eyes, my breath finally steadying, and allowed myself to feel the smallest flicker of strength. Maybe this was the beginning of something I had never dared to believe in. Support that could not be stripped away, loyalty that was not conditional. For the first time in weeks, I felt the faintest sense of relief settle in my chest, fragile but real. Julian leaned across the table that evening, his eyes steady, as if he already knew the decision forming in me before I did. His family had gathered us for dinner at their home in Connecticut, the kind of dinner that hummed with warmth instead of tension, where voices rose in laughter instead of sharp commands. Between courses, William mentioned the estate in New England, a sprawling property tucked against rolling hills and shaded by ancient oaks. He said it could hold 40 guests, comfortably private yet filled with character. The words were an offer, but the tone was more than that. It was a promise of belonging. Julian's mother, Elizabeth, reached for my hand across the linen-covered table. "You deserve a day that is only about love, not about survival," she said softly. I felt tears sting the corners of my eyes, because it was the first time someone had said that to me. Not about keeping the peace, not about what others might think, just love. The next morning we began to draft the guest list. 40 names. Each one carefully chosen, not from obligation but from genuine connection. Rose was at the top, written in my neat handwriting, followed by Aunt Margaret, who had always slipped me encouragement when no one else noticed. Then Emily and Grace, my cousins, who had laughed with me during summers when the weight of favoritism pressed the heaviest. When the envelopes arrived from the printer, cream with gold edging, I ran my fingers over them as if they were fragile. Julian sealed the first one and pressed it into my hands. "Take this to your grandmother," he said. "I want her to know how important she is to us." That weekend we drove to Rose's little house on Maple Street. She opened the door slowly, her silver hair tucked behind her ears, her eyes wary until she saw the envelope in my hand. Her fingers trembled as she opened it. For a long moment she just stared at the card, the words embossed in delicate script. Then tears welled in her eyes. "I never thought I would see this day for you," she whispered, pulling me close. "Not because you were not worthy, but because they made you believe you were not." My chest tightened and I hugged her harder than I had in years. Behind her, Aunt Margaret dabbed her eyes with a tissue, murmuring that she would not miss it for the world. Emily and Grace squealed as they read their invitations, their joy genuine and unfiltered. For the first time, handing out wedding invitations felt like offering pieces of myself and watching them be held gently instead of crushed. That night, though, sleep evaded me. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the shadows long and restless. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Richard's face, the smirk curling as he said I would never have a wedding. His voice crawled into the silence, sharp and cruel. I tossed and turned, my mind tugged between the warmth of the people who cherished me and the ache of the ones who had cast me aside. Julian rolled over and brushed my hair back. "You are awake again." I sighed. "I keep thinking about them. About whether I should send an invitation." His brow furrowed. After everything they did, the question hung heavy in the dark. Part of me wanted to believe in reconciliation, in the idea that family could heal if given the chance. But the louder part remembered my father's mocking laughter, my mother's carefully crafted betrayal on Facebook, Isabella's gloating words. Julian held my hand. "This is your day, our day. We choose who deserves to be there." The simplicity of his statement cut through the noise in my head. For years my life had been shaped around what my parents wanted, what Isabella demanded, what would keep the peace. But this day was not theirs to control. The following afternoon I sat at the kitchen table with the last few invitations in front of me. The empty envelopes stared back like accusations. My hand hovered, pen shaking slightly as if part of me still waited for permission. Then I pushed them aside. They would remain blank. I thought of the look on my father's face, his certainty that I would never stand in a white dress with someone who loved me. I thought of my mother twisting words until the world saw me as the problem. I thought of Isabella, smug and triumphant when she believed I had been erased from the story entirely. I whispered into the quiet, almost like a vow. "Not this time." When Julian came home that evening, I showed him the stack of completed invitations, each one sealed and ready. The pile was smaller without their names, but it felt stronger. He looked at me, searching my face, then smiled gently. "So you decided?" I nodded, the weight in my chest lighter than it had been in years. "They will not be there." He kissed my forehead and pulled me into his arms. "Then we will celebrate with the people who matter." Later that night, as I slipped the invitations into the mailbox, I felt the finality settle in. It was not bitterness, it was clarity. I was choosing my future, and in that choice, I finally let go of the hold they had kept on me for so long. I walked back inside, the cold air sharp against my cheeks, and for the first time the silence in my home felt like peace instead of emptiness. The bridal shop smelled faintly of lavender and new fabric, a comforting blend that settled my nerves as I stood in front of the mirror. The gown hugged my frame, softly, layers of ivory tulle cascading around me in a way that felt unreal. Emily and Grace circled me like excited bees, their voices overlapping as they fussed over details I hadn't even considered. "The neckline is perfect," Emily said, adjusting a stray strap. Grace clasped her hands together. "And the train, oh my gosh, it's like something out of a magazine." I laughed, a sound that startled me because it came so easily. For years, laughter had felt guarded, as if I needed to be careful not to draw too much attention. But here, surrounded by people who wanted nothing from me but to see me happy, it came naturally. Diana, the seamstress, pinned the fabric carefully. She tilted her head, studying the way the gown fell, then smiled at me in the mirror. "This is your dress. You can see it in your eyes." I stared at my reflection, trying to reconcile the woman in the mirror with the girl who had once sat silently in family dinners, shrinking into the background while Isabella was praised. The woman staring back at me looked strong. She looked loved. Later that afternoon, we gathered at my apartment. Emily and Grace sprawled across the couch, flipping through mood boards and Pinterest photos, throwing out ideas faster than I could write them down. Dried lavender centerpieces, twinkle lights wrapped around the oak trees, a dessert table with homemade pies instead of a towering cake. "You don't have to make it picture perfect," Grace said, grinning as she waved her phone. "Just make it you." Aunt Margaret arrived with a notebook in hand, ever the organizer. She immediately began cross-checking the guest list, with the catering arrangements, her pen moving with precision. She reminded me so much of Rose in that moment, practical and steady, a kind of anchor I had never felt from my parents. As the sun dipped outside, painting the room in amber light, my phone buzzed. Rose's name lit up the screen. I stepped onto the balcony, heart lifting as I answered. Her voice was thick with emotion. "Oh, sweetheart, I just wanted to tell you how proud I am. I never thought I'd see this day, not because you weren't worthy, but because they worked so hard to convince you otherwise." Tears filled my eyes instantly. "Grandma, She sniffled on the other end. "I'm coming early, you hear me? I want to be there for every moment. I'll sit in the front row and clap louder than anyone." A laugh bubbled out of me, shaky but genuine. "That means everything to me." When I hung up, I stayed outside for a while, the winter air sharp against my cheeks, my heart swelling in a way I had never known. For so long I thought family meant blood, obligation, and the weight of unspoken rules. But standing there, hearing the voices of people who had chosen me, I realized family was something different. It was love freely given. The following week was a blur of fittings, tastings, and last-minute decisions. Julian was busy finalizing details with his father, but he never missed a chance to check in. Each time I saw him, he carried that same quiet steadiness, reminding me with a look or a touch that I was no longer carrying the weight alone. One evening, Emily and Grace brought over boxes of string lights and lanterns. We sat cross-legged on the floor, untangling wires and laughing at our own clumsiness. Margaret fussed over the seating chart, muttering to herself as she rearranged names until the flow felt just right. It struck me then how different this was from the chaos of my childhood home. Back then, preparation for Isabella's pageants or celebrations always left me excluded, standing at the edges, pretending not to care. Here I was at the center, not because I demanded it, but because they wanted me there. When the night ended and everyone trickled out with promises to meet again, I closed the door behind them and leaned against it, overwhelmed by the quiet joy that filled the space. I was not alone anymore. A few days later, Rose called again. This time her voice was steadier, but no less emotional. "I've been telling everyone at church. I know I shouldn't brag, but I can't help it. My Lauren is getting married." I smiled into the phone. "I hope they're ready for you to cry through the whole ceremony." Her laugh was warm, the kind that wrapped around me like a blanket. "Don't you worry, darling, those tears will be worth it." After we hung up, I placed the phone on the counter and stood in the kitchen for a long time. A memory flickered of sitting at the family dinner table years ago, my father praising Isabella in front of everyone, calling her the pride of the Carters, while my own achievements faded into silence. The ache of that moment had lived in me for years. But now, standing in the glow of a life I had built for myself, it felt smaller, almost like an echo. The preparations continued each day, bringing us closer to the wedding. And with every choice made, every detail finalized, I felt myself stepping further away from the girl they had tried to diminish and closer to the woman I was always meant to be. As I tucked away the last box of decorations, I realized that this was more than a wedding. It was a reclamation. It was proof that love, respect, and belonging could exist even when blood ties failed. And for the first time in my life, I let myself believe I deserved all of it. The night sky glittered above the Hayes family estate, a canopy of stars that seemed to bow down to the rows of soft golden lights strung across the trees. The air was cool but gentle, carrying the scent of pine and wood smoke from the torches lining the pathway. Guests moved through the courtyard with murmurs of awe, their footsteps crunching lightly on the gravel as they approached the ballroom. The moment I stepped out in my gown, a hush settled across the crowd. It wasn't the silence of judgment that I had known too many times before. It was reverence, the kind that comes when people truly see you. My chest tightened, but not with pain. It was the weight of finally being honored. Rose was seated in the front row, a delicate lace shawl draped over her shoulders. When her eyes found me, they glistened, and tears rolled freely down her cheeks. I saw Aunt Margaret lean over and pat her hand, her own expression softened with pride. Emily and Grace stood behind them, practically vibrating with excitement, their phones discreetly snapping pictures before tucking them away to clap. Julian waited at the altar, his face steady, his smile the kind that anchored me through the chaos of life. When I reached him, the world seemed to narrow until it was only the two of us, hands finding each other as though they had always belonged there. The ceremony passed like a dream, each vow spoken with a trembling voice but unwavering conviction. When the minister finally announced us husband and wife, the sound of applause erupted, echoing against the stone walls of the estate. Rose pressed a handkerchief to her face, unable to contain her sobs of joy. Aunt Margaret stood clapping until her palms turned red. As the evening carried into the reception, the ballroom glowed under chandeliers and candlelight. The long tables were dressed with ivory linens and fresh garlands of greenery, the air alive with laughter and music. For the first time in my life, I felt enveloped, not excluded. No one interrupted me, no one dismissed me. Guests leaned in when I spoke, eyes attentive, smiles genuine. During dinner, Aunt Margaret rose to give a toast. Her voice wavered at first, but then steadied. "I have known Lauren since she was a child," she said, her gaze sweeping the room before landing on me. "I have seen her overlooked, underestimated, and left behind, and tonight I see her celebrated. To witness her find love, respect, and joy is a gift I will carry for the rest of my life." Glasses clinked, the room buzzing with warmth, and I felt tears sting my eyes. For years I had dreamed of being spoken of with such pride, and now it was real, spoken before witnesses who believed every word. Later, as I moved through the guests, someone at one of the tables asked gently about my family's absence. The question might have once cut me open, but tonight I met it with a calm smile. "Only those who deserve to be here are here," I said, and the words left my mouth without bitterness, only certainty. The guest nodded with quiet understanding, and the conversation drifted back to laughter. On the dance floor, Emily and Grace dragged friends into circles, their gowns twirling, their laughter contagious. Aunt Margaret chatted with the Hayes relatives, already trading recipes and family stories. Rose sat near the fire, watching everything with a glow of contentment that reminded me of the safety I had always longed for. Julian pulled me into our first dance, the room dimming slightly as the music began. His hand was firm at my waist, his eyes locked on mine, and as we moved, everything else fell away. I could hear the faint clapping and rhythm, see the smiles of friends surrounding us, but none of it mattered compared to the serenity that flowed through me. He leaned close, his voice low enough that only I could hear. "We made it here together." I rested my forehead against his shoulder, my heart steady in a way it had never been before. For years I had chased approval from people who could never give it. Now I had chosen a different kind of belonging, one built on love that asked for nothing but truth. As the song swelled, I lifted my head and met his eyes, feeling the certainty settle deep inside me. The past had tried to break me, but it had led me here to a night wrapped in light, laughter, and freedom. The applause rose around us as the song ended, but my world stayed quiet, anchored by the man whose hand still held mine. And for once, I did not feel the need to look over my shoulder. I was exactly where I was meant to be. The morning after the wedding, my phone buzzed before the sun had fully risen. Dozens of notifications piled up on the screen, all from the same thread. My father's clipped words came first, accusing me of humiliating the family. Then my mother's messages followed in a rush, sharp and frantic. "How dare you shut us out? You've embarrassed us in front of the entire community." My chest tightened as I scrolled, not because their words carried the old weight, but because I realized they were still trying to twist the story into something it was not. When I ignored the messages, Evelyn turned to the only platform she truly understood: Facebook. By mid-morning, her post had gathered comments from church acquaintances and neighbors alike. I read the words slowly, each sentence painting her as a grieving mother wronged by her own child. I was not invited to my daughter's wedding, she wrote, leaving out every cruel remark, every deliberate cut that had led us here. The comments poured in, people consoling her, offering sympathy, some shaking their heads in disbelief at my supposed cruelty. For a moment, heat rushed up my throat, anger so sharp I almost replied publicly. I could have posted every receipt, every word they had said to me. I could have exposed the years of erasure. But my fingers hovered over the keyboard, then fell still. Replying would mean I still owed them something. That afternoon my phone rang with a number I recognized immediately. William Hayes rarely called directly, but when I answered, his voice was firm. "I saw the post," he said. "I'm not going to stand by and let them drag you." His tone carried a weight that made me sit straighter in my chair. He told me he had already left a message for my parents. If they did not remove the post and apologize, he would make sure the entire community knew the truth. He didn't have to raise his voice. The calm certainty in his words was enough to strip away any doubt. By evening the post vanished. No follow-up, no apology, just silence. It was the first time in my life that my parents had backed down so quickly, and it was not because of me. It was because someone with more authority than them had finally told them no. I stared at the empty space where their words had been, a strange calm settling in my chest. For once I wasn't the one scrambling to defend myself. Weeks slipped into months. Married life with Julian steadied into something quiet and full. My career at Hayes Capital pushed forward, and I found myself thriving in a way I never had when I was still tethered to their judgment. The Carter name stopped echoing in my ears every morning. Until one crisp October afternoon, Isabella called. Her voice was brittle, stripped of the sharpness it once carried. She asked if we could meet. Against my better judgment, I agreed, curiosity outweighing hesitation. We met in a coffee shop downtown, the same kind of place where years earlier she would have mocked me for spending my weekends buried in spreadsheets. She looked tired, her hair pulled into a loose knot, her eyes ringed with exhaustion. Thomas joined her, his jaw tight, his posture defensive. They spoke in turns, explaining how their startup had collapsed under mounting debt. Investors had pulled out, contracts had been canceled, and their once glossy image had begun to crumble. They wanted help, not just financial but strategic. They knew I had the resources, the knowledge, the connections. For a long moment, I said nothing, letting their words fill the space. Once I would have jumped at the chance to prove my worth, to earn a nod of approval. Now all I saw was the same pattern repeating. They had discarded me when I didn't suit their picture, and now they wanted me to be the savior. Finally, I spoke, my voice steady. Family is supposed to help each other, isn't it? Their faces lit with the faintest glimmer of hope before I finished. Tell me, where were you when you locked me out of your wedding? Where were you when you stood by and let our parents say I would never deserve this life? Neither of them answered. Isabella's lip trembled, but no words came. Thomas shifted uncomfortably, his hand drumming against the table. I leaned back, my decision already made. You only come to me now because you think I can fix what you broke. But I don't owe you that. I gathered my coat, stood, and left them sitting there, the weight of their choices settling heavier than any financial loss. As I stepped out into the crisp air, the autumn sun low in the sky, I realized something I had never felt before. For the first time in my life, I had the upper hand. Not because I had money or power, but because I no longer needed their approval. They had no control left. The leaves crunched under my heels as I walked to my car, and in the quiet that followed, I felt the certainty settle in. This wasn't revenge, it was freedom. And for once I knew the victory was mine. The weeks that followed passed quietly, filled with work and evenings that melted into warm dinners with Julian. Then one morning, as the sunlight streamed across our kitchen counter, I stared down at the small test in my hand. My breath caught. Positive. My fingers shook as I pressed against the edge of the counter, the reality sinking in. A new life. Our life. I waited until evening to tell Julian, wanting to see his face in the soft light of home. He came in tired but smiling, loosening his tie, and I felt the secret brimming inside me. When I finally said the words, his arms wrapped around me before I could finish. He pressed his forehead against mine and whispered that this was everything he had ever wanted. For the first time in so long, I felt whole. The first person I told beyond Julian was Rose. I called her late one night, nervous laughter tumbling out of me as I shared the news. She gasped, her voice breaking with joy, and within days, a small package arrived. Inside was a pair of tiny hand-knit booties, soft as clouds, the yarn pale yellow. Tucked into the corner was a note in her careful handwriting. "Family is who shows up." I pressed the paper to my chest, tears slipping down my cheeks. Dinners with Margaret, afternoons with Emily and Grace, all of them wrapped me in a sense of belonging I had once thought impossible. They planned showers, argued over names, and fussed over the baby before the baby had even made its presence known beyond a flutter inside me. They were my family, chosen and steady. But news travels quickly even without my saying a word. One evening, my phone lit up with an unfamiliar delivery confirmation. A large box arrived the next day, wrapped with glossy paper and tied in an elaborate bow. Inside was a baby blanket, pink and frilly, with a card signed in Evelyn's delicate cursive. "No